Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and co-creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the fearful avoidant confuses love and infatuation. So this is sort of a part two to the prior video about how the fearful avoidant perceives love and what their expectations are around love. But I wanted to dig into this a little bit more deeply because I would say out of all insecure attachment styles, the fearful avoidant sort of struggles with this the most. And this is really like, what does love look like? And what is it supposed to feel like after that initial dating stage, after that infatuation has started to wear off, as the honeymoon phase even sort of comes to a close and we transition into the future parts of the life cycle of a relationship. Now, the reason for this at its core is that the fearful avoidant, the reason for this being the confusion is that the fearful avoidant didn't have the same strategies as other attachment styles for connection. They had a lot more confusion than all other attachment styles. So what does this mean? Well, if you look at a secure person, for example, when they're children, when they cry or express their emotions, they usually get heard, and the caregiver comes and helps them. There's some sort of positive reinforcement to their emotions. Like they get heard, they get listened to, they get seen, catered to, not in like an unhealthy way, but just connected to essentially. And same with their needs. When they express a need, that need is usually met. And so this can be through crying, this can be through saying I'm hungry or whatever it might be. The dismissive avoidant, by the same sort of token, even though a lot of their needs are not met, there's a consistency to it. Like their needs are often physically met in many ways, but emotionally met, it's not really there, but there's a consistency to it. So the brain has this opportunity to adapt and be like, okay, cause and effect. Like if I express emotions, they're not going to be heard, and that's consistent. And so I can know that with some sort of certainty. And so the brain develops this adaptation to this by going, okay, well, I'm just not going to keep expressing myself in this direction. I'm going to learn to just repress my emotions, and that feels safer and that works better for me, and I can know that. And same with the anxious, right? They have the same idea. It's like, well, when I get with my caregiver, when they're connected to me, they soothe me, and that consistently works. And in the meantime, I might be waiting and it might be stressful, but I can trust them that when they're here, they tend to be good at soothing me, and they tend to be present. In the other time, it may feel really uncomfortable, but at least there's a consistency of reliability on the caregiver to tend to my emotional needs or physiological needs when they are there. Now, the fearful avoidant, what they tend to have is a lot more of this inconsistency. That's why they're sometimes also referred to as the disorganized attachment style, because they don't have an organized attachment strategy. Because sometimes the caregiver is warm and loving and lovely and can be there. And this can be because the caregiver was an addict, and so when they're sober, they're great. When they're not, then it's tough. It can be because there's a lot of violence in the household. So when the parents are apart, each parent is a little bit more safe. It can be because the parent has their own personality disorder or extreme mood swings, or is having trouble with emotional regulation. So one day the caregiver's warm and nice, and the other day the caregiver's, sort of terrible. And so as a result of this, the fearful avoidant develops this hypervigilance as an attachment strategy. Like, I just have to be super attuned all the time and know all the time and always tuning in and checking in and trying to understand so that I can adapt accordingly. Now, when we fast forward this and we take this to the topic now, how does this show up and how does this impact the adult fearful avoidance romantic relationship and how they show up? They have that same strategy alive and well. And what that strategy does is it acts as a barrier to be able to move into things like the stability and commitment and bliss phases of the relationship, because the fearful avoidance is not getting a chance to settle in. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we can do about this and sort of how this manifests in other ways as well, other little nuances that you'll see, and what you can do to manage this, because you might still have a little bit of the hypervigilance and that ability to be super attuned or really tuned in, but it doesn't have to rule your life and stunt the life cycle of your relationships. And I think this is one of the number one reasons that a fearful avoidant struggles in getting past the honeymoon phase of a relationship, is because of exactly this thing. So One quick thing I have to mention that I always forget is we are here to support you during this time. So anything you need, I am reading the comments. I'm going back and checking in on things. I know you guys asked for a part 2 of this video. I'm trying to create as close to a daily video as possible just during this isolation time. If you guys are interested, we have an advanced fearful avoidant course out right now that goes into this but tenfold and talks about all the different little nuances and things that can come up in each of the 6 stages of a relationship and how to really reprogram and how to manage like dating and the dating world and your dating life and your relationship life, because I think for the fearful avoidant, it's probably one of the most confusing things, even though they can be hard and tough and strong on the outside. I think internally fearful avoidants feel almost the most confused by relationships. And it's not to say other attachment styles don't really struggle in different ways as well, but it doesn't have to be like this, right? So anyways, so we have membership sales. They are 25% off bundles of memberships for 3 months, 6 months. I know quarantine's supposed to sort of be going on for quite some time. So we're here to support you. And if you want some kind of scholarship and some kind of financial plan, or in some very specific cases as well, we're fully covering depending on, financial situations, single parents, these sorts of things. So please reach out to us. Please share with us about your situation. And we are happy to support you during this time and support our community in any way that we can. So let's go back to this. So the fearful avoidant and them confusing love. So some of these early things, right? So you take this hypervigilant nature of the fearful avoidant, and they learn to be super attuned. And what this does is like, it's a superpower on one sense of the matter, right? It's like in one space, the fearful avoidant is like so amazing at connecting to their partner when they are not triggered in their relationship. They have a great ability to like tune in deeply, to connect deeply, to understand and make people feel seen and heard, right? These are some gifts that often come with the fearful avoidant attachment style. But on the other side is that the fearful avoidant in essence is holding themselves to this state of extreme perfectionism. Because imagine if you're a child and one day, mom or dad are warm and loving, and another day they're abusive maybe, or they're just, extremely scary or frightening or confusing or unwell or whatever it might be, then you learn like this is kind of a matter of survival. Like this is a big deal as a child because we are wired to fear abandonment when we're reliant on other people, on our caregivers. And so there's this like ongoing need that's tied in there, this association that's like, I could be completely unsafe, like this could end really badly. So as a result of that, you're basically holding yourself to the state of perfectionism and how well you attune to others, what the state of the relationship is like. And as a result of that, any perceived disconnect or retraction, like any time where the relationship's not at a high, the fearful avoidant is going to go, oh my God, like we're falling apart, something really bad could happen. And so because of that, there's this ongoing like pressure and burden and perfectionism in the background. Now on one side, you're going to always have this great regulation in your relationship. Like if you can tone this down and you can like get this into a healthy space, there can be a lot of success in relationships because you're willing to put in the effort and check in and be consistent. On the flip side of that, it can be friggin' exhausting. And so it's so important to recognize. And it's also a really great place to create the breeding grounds of resentment, because other attachment styles, they don't confuse love with like perfectionism and always being at this high and having so much passion, to reinforce the safety. They usually, as they go through different parts of the life cycle of relationship, start feeling like, harmony is more important, or security or consistency or settling in is like a really great feeling. And for the fearful avoidant, they don't really understand what that means in the context of relationships, because usually in their closest attachment bonds, they haven't really had that experience. And so fearful avoidance as a result can sort of like stir up conflict accidentally, to try to keep things on a high, to try to, sometimes they'll poke at things to see what's going wrong if there is a perceived disconnect, and that can create conflict accidentally. Or also fearful avoidance can feel like they're putting in so much effort, and because we know that conflict is essentially a perception of imbalance, if the fearful avoidance putting in so much effort and they're working and trying so hard and then they don't see their partner doing the same, they can start feeling frustrated and like they don't matter, and their brain can fill in the blanks with these really painful stories or narratives like, I'm not important enough, I try so hard, why don't they try, I'm the one always carrying the weight. And it can create this like frustration or resentment over time. And it's not really, we can see so much how that like happens for the fearful avoidant from their perspective, and why it would be such a burden to carry. But it's also not really the other person's fault, because they have a different set of patterns in terms of how they relate to others. And so these two things have to sort of be like worked out or consolidated in a way. So with that being said, here are some strategies, okay? Number one, recognize this is actually based on fear. It's a gift when you learn to use it from a healthy perspective and like base it on love and be like, okay, it's because I care about the relationship, but I'm gonna be willing to let things that are less than perfect go. It's okay to have a day in the relationship where nothing amazing or exciting happens, or it wasn't the best date ever, or the best conversation ever, the funniest time ever. It doesn't always have to be on this high. And while that is a very charming thing for a lot of people and they can be really drawn into that, that's not necessarily sustainable over time in a relationship. And so, you know, the underlying reasons here, right, are based on fear of abandonment, fear of being alone, fear of failure, unworthiness, lack of safety, because the attachment figure is unpredictable. And you know, our primary attachment figure in our adult lives is our romantic partner. And so what we want to do is, if you're the fearful avoidant, you want to practice questioning your expectations and trying to first understand the other attachment styles and their different needs for harmony, consistency, settling in, and even the anxious, preoccupied attachments need for like a little bit of safety and consistency in the relationship. Though the anxious, preoccupied, when I do the next video in this series, you'll see that they do tend to share some of these patterns, but in a different way, in a different context. And so question your expectations and try to understand where the other person is coming from. This will help you relax, number one. Number two, recognize when you're putting this pressure on yourself. Try to feel what that pressure feels like. And you might have a hard time because it's so close to your face at first. It's like you've been seeing through this lens for so long, but it tends to show up for the fearful avoidant in all 7 areas of life. And again, this can be a gift. Like in the workplace, it can help you like manage all the relationships and be really effective and understand what everybody expects and needs from you. And it can help you in so many different ways. But if you're ruling your life through that like perceptual filter and that lens, and you're always like filling up your identity with everything outside of you and all these little nuances and all these different things, number one, people become exhausting. And number two, you're always in this sort of state of fight or flight, which is taxing your nervous system over time and doesn't bode well long-term for physical health. And just emotional well-being. And you'll probably also struggle with chronic fatigue and burnout a lot more easily. Another thing, try to take those fears and address like the underlying strategy. So for example, let's say you realize, okay, well, there's a fear of abandonment or fear of failure. Have like healthier strategies for yourself so you don't have to fall into this like hypervigilance pattern. Try to have these like organized connection strategies. So maybe, for example, you and your partner decide that you're going to check in on your needs once a week. Hey, are your needs being met in the relationship? And you just have a direct conversation about it, because it takes off all the need of like being hypervigilant and trying to guess and understand and put patterns together and see if there's any miscommunication in the patterns, all these different things. So have that conversation. Number two, question your stories. I talk about this a lot more in the school and like the different specifics and the tools, but just recognize, like just at a high level here, recognize, this is probably the most important thing a fearful avoidant can do. Recognize the narratives and the meaning they give to situations and work on just separating that from reality and try to understand what your underlying needs are, okay? And try to communicate about those needs directly is also extremely important. So maybe you need validation or reinforcement in the relationship. So you can just say, hey, you know, are we in a good space? Are we good? Is there anything we can work on? And just have these check-ins so you can have this conscious conversation around it instead of trying to play the guessing game, because I want you to think about like how exhausting that actually is over time. It can be extremely draining to be constantly in the state of like guessing, figuring out, trying to decide, understand. It's a lot of pressure and a lot of weight to carry. And again, it's going to create the breeding grounds for resentment over time. So with that being said, I hope that this all makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. And thank you so much for watching. And please like and share and subscribe to this channel if you're getting a lot of value out of it. And I will see you in the next video.